Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gavin Whitechurch.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to IoT. Well, thank you so much for arriving so fresh and early on this bright Tuesday morning. So this is our pre-keynote briefing. It's going to give you a deep dive into the Asian IoT market, and I'm really pleased to say we've got a fantastic expert on the Asian IoT market with us to give you this briefing. I've seen the slide deck. He's got an enormous amount of information. I know he has an enormous amount of knowledge in this area as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Charles Reed Anderson from Charles Reed Anderson Associates. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So you're the early risers who make it out for the 8 o'clock presentation. So I'm glad there's some people here. So what we're going to talk about today is IoT in Asia Pacific. But don't worry, I'm going to give you global stats and US stats as well. But I look at it from a different perspective because I live in Singapore. So I cover Asia Pacific, which means I've got a market of 4.5 billion people. I've got some markets that are probably more advanced than you get in the US with Japan and Korea. But then I've got Myanmar and Vietnam on the bottom end, everything in between. So what I do over there is I sort of sit in the middle of everybody. So I've got my own consulting firm focusing on IoT, and I work with the VCs to help them identify the funding side of it. I work with governments about smart cities, enterprises to try and identify what they should be doing with this, and the tech vendors. So basically, I'm completely technology and network agnostic. So any opinion I give, I'm not supporting anything in particular. I give my honest views. So I'm kind of like Switzerland for IoT. And then around that, I do everything from market analysis, go-to-market, and market engagement. But what's interesting on this is I get to cover this wide range and see what's really driving it and what's holding it back. So what we're going to talk about today is a few things. First, we're going to look at the current state of IoT. So that'll be your stats section for the people who like seeing the numbers and what's going on. Then I'm going to talk about what's next, so the trends that I think will define the success of the industry over the next 12 to 24 months. And finally, what I call the IoT Watch List. And these are going to be your best practice examples. And I'll show you some really innovative solutions that have the potential to drive true innovation and transformation. So we all talk about IoT, and we know it creates some opportunities, but what do businesses think they can actually drive out of this? And I tend to break it down into 3 areas. I look to see what they can do strategically, and then operationally and financially. So what do they really want to drive? And what you can see is a lot of people see strategic benefits from IoT, whether it relates to product and service innovation, competitive advantage, and then enhancing that customer experience. Operationally as well, we're seeing how we can drive operational excellence inside the organizations, about workforce optimization, enhancing the process monitoring, and then leveraging data to make better decisions. And then finally, there's these financial benefits that people see. And a lot of it is around cost savings. And they think we can do that across things like operating costs, automating processes, and then reducing headcount. The one thing that I did question about this is 43% of companies think that they can drive new revenue streams. And this is something I don't see yet. I don't see a lot of people making revenue streams and new revenue streams from IoT. So I think that part's early days. So just so you know, this is a survey we just completed in March 2018. And it covers 1,200 companies worldwide, 1,217. But of course, I can split it out. So on each of these slides, I'll give you a couple examples of where there's variances between what we see in the Americas versus Asia Pacific. And to start out, enhancing the customer experience, the Americas come out a little bit ahead. So 62% of companies here think that they can actually drive this, whereas it's a little bit less when you look at Asia Pacific. And then on the operating costs, cutting those. In the US, it's much less. Whereas in Asia Pacific, it's much more. Now, when you look at these two, this is where there's only significant variances across the rest of the questions. And that's because the US is a more developed market than you get at Asia Pacific when you look at it as a whole. So in Asia, the organizations haven't been streamlining. So that's why they see the opportunity to actually drive this. But of course, there's going to be challenges as well. And this I broke down into 3 sections. First, I looked at it from the ecosystem side. So what do we see in that vendor community? And then, of course, security, because everyone loves talking about security with IoT. And then what internal challenges do these organizations face? So when you look at it from the ecosystem, vendor integration comes across the top. And I would expect this because as an industry, we still don't understand the complexity of IoT solutions. Any IoT solution is going to be multiple products from multiple vendors to create this single solution. So getting them all to work together and then link into your existing systems is going to be a challenge. Lack of use cases comes out number 2 there at 37%, but that's actually not that bad, because if you go back a couple years, this would have been well above 50%. We're starting to identify use cases that can deliver value back to the organizations. And the good news on this, lack of global standards is down at 25%, and in immature vendor landscapes at 10%. That means the market is maturing. Yes, there's still some concerns, but it's not like it used to be in previous years. Next, we'll look at security. To be honest, if I come back here in 5 years, it's still going to be one of the top concerns. It comes out at cybersecurity risk is at 56%, and then regulatory at about 44%. Now, I have a controversial view on this because I'm not worried about IoT security, because I think we can lock down any solution, from locking down the endpoint to the data in transit, data at rest, and the application security. We just don't. So that's a problem that we have as organizations and as an industry. And part of the problem with this is, when IoT starts off, we don't do big initiatives. We tend to start with a proof of concept, with limited resources, limited budgets. And that means you tend to skip over a few steps, which means security. Why invest in it heavily if it's just a proof of concept? Well, these proof of concepts then grow, and we haven't really thought about how to mitigate these security risks. So it becomes a challenge. Internally, this is also going to cause a lot of problems. Number 1 comes across at CapEx, the upfront costs, and this really worries me. The same thing I was just talking about, how things start off as proof of concepts. Organizations struggle to come up with the CapEx justification if it's only going to be a proof of concept. What if it doesn't work? I've just bought all of this stuff. Defining the business requirements and skill shortage are a little bit less, lack of user adoption. CapEx, you can see, is at 56, but OpEx is only at 25. They like this new OpEx as a service model, which isn't so new anymore. The one positive out of this is only 14% are concerned about a lack of senior management support. And this is important. If you went back a couple years ago, this was well over 50%. What's happened is all these digital disruptors are scaring the C-suite. They're getting concerned because they actually see how somebody can come in from a next-door industry, or someone from just completely new industry can come in and attack their businesses. So that's a good thing to see. Now, when you look at the variances on this one, vendor integration is a bigger challenge in Asia Pacific, but that's because the ICT vendor community is less mature there. The other challenge we see around this, or the differences we see, is around the business requirements. So in the Americas, it's much less, whereas in Asia, we're still struggling with it. But the most important one to realize on this, and what we run into in Asia Pacific, is we have a bigger challenge with skills shortage. And that's because your market here is more mature. What we also have in Asia is we've got huge markets like China, which produce some incredible talents, but then they don't get paid the best. So what they want to do is move to a country like Malaysia, let's say, so they make a little bit more. But then when they do well in Malaysia, they want to move to Singapore because they can make more there, and then they want to go to the US or to Australia. So we end up having people, we always are running into problems identifying those people with the skills to deliver these solutions. So hopefully we'll get over it, but it is still a bigger problem in Asia Pacific. So if you're looking to do business there, be prepared for that. But as I mentioned, we're seeing more collaboration. Senior management is getting involved. And we asked the question about what do you actually see? So which stakeholders are you involving in your initiatives? Interestingly, 98% involve IT. I have big questions about the 2% that actually aren't, but I'll have to go back and talk to them because I'm wondering, why would you not have IT involved in this? Senior management is up at 86%, but then there's this huge drop-off. And this is one of the big challenges we face. Ops and finance are getting involved, but it's only at 40% of the time. And then strategy. We talked about all these strategic benefits we want to deliver, yet we're only involving 17% of strategy. And then enhancing the customer experience, but only 13% of marketing. And then it gets worse, product team at 8%. The biggest concern I have is going to be about these end users. So this looks at it from internal, partners, and customers. Do we actually involve the people who are going to be using these solutions as stakeholders? And we don't. And when you go across, what we see is only 12% of the companies and initiatives involved any end user as a stakeholder. And that's worrying because we're doing this build it and they will come. That doesn't work. And if you remember last year around the time of IoT World Forum, Cisco announced that 3/4 of IoT initiatives fail. But when you see numbers like this and that we're not involving the stakeholders, it makes it easier to understand why. When you look at this in the Americas versus Asia Pacific, the only real difference was in finance, where in the Americas you involve less of finance, in Asia slightly more. But everything else was almost in line. So there's still a lot of work to do here. And now if you're one of these enterprises, you understand the benefits and the challenges you face, and you got your stakeholders, then you got to come up with a solution and which vendors do I talk to. And any IoT solution involves something like this. You're going to have a thing that you're going to want to connect. That thing is going to send data over a network. It's going to go through the platforms. You're going to store some of it and then put some of it out as an application. Across that whole ecosystem, you need to consider security, integration, and support, or managed services. So if I'm an enterprise or I'm a government and I want to create a solution, there's a lot of vendors there I got to figure out who should I be talking to? What should I be doing with them? And so what we did in the survey is we wanted to identify who are your preferred partners. And we broke it down. We looked at 374 existing projects. So those decisions would have been made about a year ago. And then 843 future projects. So the ones that are going to be delivered in the next 12 months. And this allows us to almost look at a snapshot of what happened then and now, what is changing in the market. And what you can see is, if you look at the existing ones, analytics vendors, so your AWSs, IBMs, were doing very well on the existing projects, and they've gone down to 18% on the future ones. Whereas the hardware vendors have gone from 13 to 21. So your Cisco, Huawei's, Dell's, they're doing much better right now as becoming the preferred IoT partner. Now, this doesn't mean that they're doing everything, but this means that they're the lead partner for the initiatives. When you go down, you see operational technology vendors. So your Bosch, Schneider Electrics are doing quite well at 14%. I'd imagine that this would continue to go up in the coming years because if you go into any of these industries that leverage these OT vendors, they own those customer relationships. So as they continue to branch out and get deeper prongs into the customers, they should be able to win more deals. Fixed and mobile operators are starting to grow as well. That has to do a lot with low power WANs. We're seeing explosions of things like NB-IoT, LoRa, Sigfox coming out. That's driving the move to the operators. Now the question is, can they actually deliver the solutions that go on top of those networks? SIs are still relatively low, systems integrators, only at 12%. Now, when you look at the challenges I mentioned earlier about vendor integration, it's quite shocking that they're not doing more. But that's because SIs come late to the party when it comes to things like IoT and then mobility before. They wait until the market's more established and they can hire the expensive headcount to sell the expensive solutions. So we have a chicken and egg situation there. And then you've got some of the other ones, the equipment manufacturers, cloud providers, app platforms, small amounts leading there. Now, what's interesting on this is you're probably thinking, or hopefully at least some of you are thinking that, well, actually, IBM sits in analytics vendors, but it might sit down here as well. Huawei's in hardware, but they've got Jasper as their platform with Kinetic. So they sit across multiple ones. Well, we actually know which brand they picked. So now what I can actually show you is where they're going. But first, I wanted to mention one quick difference, and this is interesting. In the Americas, analytics vendors are going up to almost 1/3 of the projects. So they are doing way better, but that's at the expense of the hardware vendors. So whatever those guys are doing here, they should start replicating it in Europe and Asia Pacific as well. But now, who's winning? Which brands are leading the way? And this is the one people tend to like because they want to know which brands are on top. And what you can see is IBM is almost at 11%. So they're the preferred partner on almost 11% of the deals. Cisco comes in second at 8.8. And I'll be honest, when I met with Cisco to discuss this, I tell them that's fantastic for them. Because since they acquired Jasper, they haven't done that much marketing around it. Only in the last probably 6 months that they really got their messaging going back out. Whereas 2 or 3 years ago, everything was about IoE, and they were the one driving visibility of IoT. And they were able to maintain that lead without really doing anything for about 18 months. Huawei's doing very well. Interestingly, in Asia, we see Huawei doing better in the more developed markets there than in the emerging ones, and Cisco does better in emerging, which you wouldn't expect because of the price points. And you also have Microsoft in the top 4. So you got 4 of the world's leading ICT brands up there. But then what you see, when you go down a little bit farther, you got a few of the main OT vendors coming in. So you got Schneider, Bosch, and Rockwell, getting 5%, 3.8%, and 3.4%. You've also got a couple of the other leaders with SAP and Amazon, and then finally Dell. So the big brands are still leading the way. There's not that much of a variance when you look at it globally, which was quite shocking. We thought we would see certain vendors doing much better in certain countries, and it doesn't change that much. So when these enterprises are looking at it, what are the reasons they're picking their preferred vendors? Not surprisingly, they want someone who has technical expertise. But what's interesting and what I was a bit surprised by, it's a lot about brand reputation. Industry-specific expertise is only just over 50%. When you go down, what worries me about this is only 9% are concerned about the partner network. I'm going to hit back again on this vendor integration. If this is the biggest challenge we're facing, why are we not asking our vendors more about their partner networks? The other interesting one is only 13% are concerned about global coverage. And this is what we need to understand about IoT. It's much more of a local solution still. It's in country, and we're not doing this cross-border as much. That will change over time as it becomes more mature, we identify more use cases, and we get networks that can support it globally. So on this, there's a couple differences here. The brand reputation is more important in Asia than in the US, but it's still very important here. So that was a lot of stats really quickly. So I'm going to give you 3 takeaways. So if you can remember these 3 things, that's all you really need to know about my stats. So all you people who were taking pictures before, you can throw those away and just take these pictures. And it's about, the first takeaway is it's about the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good news, 86% of companies are engaging senior management. That's a positive thing, which means senior management knows we need to leverage these solutions going forward. But the bad news, and it's really bad, when I mention those things about the benefits, if you align that with the stakeholders, there's some pretty bad scenarios coming up. Product and service innovation, 66%. Only 8% involve the product team. Competitive advantage, 59%, but only 17% involving strategy. An enhanced customer experience at 56% or 54%, only 13% involving marketing. Now, you're probably going to impact the customer experience, but you have a good chance of impacting it negatively if you don't involve marketing. And then you got ops and finance as well, a little bit better, but still there's much more room for improvement. So it isn't all about the technical side. It's about who are we engaging as stakeholders internally. And then, of course, the ugly. And on this one, only 12% engaging end users as stakeholders. This is a big risk. We can't just keep building these things and assuming people are going to use them. We got to design them to their requirements. And one other thing, I used this slide a couple weeks ago, and a few people came up afterwards and said that that's actually not an ugly dog, it's a cute dog. I disagree. I do think that's an ugly dog. So, the takeaway number 2 is this CapEx conundrum we face. 25% have concerns about OpEx, but 56% are concerned about CapEx. So think about this. All these projects start as proof of concepts. They don't have the budget, so we got to find ways to engage them by spending less, or make them spend less. These customers want and need shared risk models, whether it means as a service or something where you're sharing the risk, maybe it's a buyback plan on it. Because if not, it's going to hold back the initiatives. And then finally, vendors, you need to come up with these new financial models to drive this adoption. Otherwise, we're going to keep running into this problem. We're going to try and sell them something that they don't want to buy and they can't afford to buy because they can't justify it up front. And the final takeaway, if you are a vendor, you don't have to own the customer relationship. You can also win by partnering with those who do. As I mentioned, all the solutions involve multiple products from multiple vendors. If the OT vendor owns the customer relationship, make sure you're partnering with them. What we always tend to do is invest so much in our direct sales force going out there and less in our channel partners. Invest more in those channel partners because if they win, they're going to pull through your business. So do whatever you can to make their lives easier. So that's the end of the stats. So if you didn't like stats, I'm sorry I've bored you. Hopefully now it'll get more exciting. So now we're going to talk about what is next and what's going to impact the industry in the coming years. And for me, the big one over the next 12 to 24 months is about low-power WANs. And if you go back in Asia, 2 years ago from right now, there were 0. There was none. Then what you had is SK Telecom became the second one in the world by about a week to launch a nationwide LoRa network. And now what we're starting to see is Sigfox, LoRa, and NB-IoT exploding all across the region. And you're getting this in the US as well. You've got Machine Q doing LoRa. You've got a Sigfox network here and a couple people doing NB-IoT, and then LTE-M. But this creates a lot of opportunity because these are low-cost solutions for customers. And now we've built all these networks. Now we've got to find out what to do with it. Interesting, if you are looking at NB-IoT, I'll give you one piece of advice. If you ever see a global number about how NB-IoT is growing fantastically well, ask them to back out China. The numbers coming out of China are outstanding, but it's government-backed. The government is encouraging enterprises and backing the operators to make NB-IoT a success there. And the growth is huge, but we don't see that growth everywhere else. So I would always say ask them to back that out. So looking at LPWANs, of course, when we talk to customers, they're going to have challenges around it. And what you see is security comes out at 72%. Now, overall, for security for IoT, it's only 56%. So why are so many more people concerned about security with low-power WANs? In theory, a lot of times, these should be things where security doesn't matter. It's just connecting up basic things that might not be business critical and might not have that much of a risk. Hardware costs are still relatively high as well, and that's because the modules for things like NB-IoT are quite expensive. That needs to come down, but that should go down as we see more demand go up. The other one is the lack of use cases. It's 37% overall and 50% when you look at it from the perspective of just low-power WANs. On the other side, there's some other things that aren't that interesting, but the bottom there, lack of vendor support, that's good. Vendors are getting active. Everybody's talking about low-power WANs, and not just the network providers. All the leading ICT vendors have a role to play in this, and they're out marketing it as well. But what we see on this as well, there is some differences. Hardware costs are a bigger concern in Asia. When you get to emerging markets, this is a big risk for us. And the use cases as well, we struggle in Asia for it because we haven't identified them that can actually justify or deliver a positive ROI. Even at a low cost, it's difficult to deliver. And finally, on this, the market fragmentation. You see it is more fragmented or more worry of that in the Americas than Asia Pacific. So this is interesting. It sort of flips, where I would think because the US is a more developed market, there'd be less of a concern. But maybe you're a little bit more advanced and you realize actually this fragmentation means we're going to be putting things on all three different types of networks, and that's more management complexity. What we need to remember on this is it's up to these vendors now. They need to tailor their marketing messages. And I've told the people with LoRa, I've talked to a lot of the guys at Sigfox and the in-country operators in Asia and the NB-IoT providers. It's your marketing messaging. And I've been warning about the security issue for a couple of years now. The market doesn't think your networks are secure, so it's up to you to explain to them why. And they always tend to say, well, our networks are secure. Fine, convince the market, not me. I don't make up the stats. So what does the future hold? Actually, it's pretty good. At least it should be a little bit optimistic on this. We asked all these respondents, do you plan to use IoT going forward or low-power WANs going forward? And the vast majority said yes. I mean, all the ones in pink, darker red than red, that's where they may or they plan to use it or use it today. And then it's also good because only a very small percentage say that they will not use it, so less than 10%. But the interesting bit's going to be is the gray area here. They don't have enough information to decide. So this is why it's up to the marketing messaging. Can you convince these people that you should be using it? So it's these undecideds that will determine whether LPWANs succeed or fail. When you look at the Americas, you do have a different split here, which was quite interesting. It's a little bit bigger when it comes to Sigfox, but more people have a good understanding of NB-IoT, so there's less of a room to move. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, but look for those undecideds. If they can convert that into people wanting to use it, there's a good future. If they start going to the left, into the will not use, it's not going to look so bright. So IoT, everybody's doing it, but the question is, where are the cool solutions? We keep talking about how great it is and all these amazing possibilities. We have smart cities that are going to change the way we work, live, and play. But as citizens, do we really see it today? How many solutions do you see that are truly transforming your life? And so I created this thing called a watch list, and I put it out occasionally, but I have to find something that's really interesting. For me, a piece of technology isn't interesting because you need multiple technologies to come together to create a solution. So I look for solution supply that's out there. So what's a cool solution that meets a market demand? And on this, I want to see where there's actually a need for a product, where it's solving a solution or solving a problem. And then finally, I look for funding aspects. So anytime I put something on the watch list, it's where these things come together to create a solution that could actually be transformative. And the first thing I'm going to look at on this is about elderly care in Asia. And I don't know how much you know about this, but Asia is facing a massive crisis when it comes to taking care of the elderly. What we have is almost 550 million people who are over the age of 60 in Asia today. By 2030, Asia Pacific will spend $20 trillion just managing the elderly. And then by 2050, we will have 1.3 billion people in Asia over the age of 60 and 260 million over the age of 80. Now, this is important to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, when I made this slide, I realized in 2050, I will actually be 80 years old. So I'm worried about this, and I want to make sure we develop solutions that if I live that long, I have an easy life. But then if you look at it more specifically in places like Japan, if you've ever heard about the elderly care crisis there, I mean, it's great that we live longer, but with that comes challenges. They already spend $128 billion a year to manage patients with dementia. And by 2025, 5% of the population is going to have dementia, rising to 10% by 2050. So this is your problem we need to solve. So how do you go about it? Because I deal with governments, I deal with healthcare institutions, and they say, they all address it. We know we have a problem, we just don't know where to go because it's so expensive to deliver these solutions. So collaboration is going to be the key to this. And there was a cool thing that came out almost a year ago now, and it's this company called Omate. It's out in Shenzhen. They make a bunch of different types of products. But what they've done with smartwatches is they make them for niche groups. So they've got a kids watch, but this is their elderly care watch. So it comes with 4G. It allows you to call emergency services. It can do reminders. These things are a dime a dozen in Shenzhen and coming out of Taipei. But it's an interesting solution, and I like that it's actually connected. But as I said, that's just, for me, a piece of technology. So what they did is they partnered with a European platform provider called SafeMotion, which is a platform that already tries to manage elderly care patients online, so you can access it from a computer or a mobile device. And so that brings together the solution now. You've got that full wrapper of, okay, we can take this to market. But the thing is, you still have something that's going to be expensive. You got hardware and software and services added onto that. But what's really interesting is they partnered with Credit Mutuel Arkéa. Now, this is a banking insurance conglomerate in France. And what's nice is they have 5 million customers already. So you're bringing the demand side of the table together. You're bringing those users to somebody who's got the supply. I like that. What I also liked is, because it's a bank, instead of selling it as maybe $300 for the watch, and don't quote me because I don't remember the exact price of the watch, but say it's $300 for the watch and then $20 a month, they're not doing it all as a service. Now, this gets over a lot of the blockers inside of governments and healthcare providers, because now you don't have to go and spend all the CapEx. It's a pure OpEx type model. So for me, this is the great collaboration I've seen. And what I like about it is, it's best practice I've seen for collaboration as far as bringing together the different technologies and the demand side of the market. What I also like is wearables as a service. There's a lot of great use cases for wearables, but if we try and sell everyone the watches as CapEx and not OpEx, it's going to be a challenge. The OpEx model works because people can fund it that way. And then finally, if you make this work for elderly care, that's just the beginning, because this can go into other types of healthcare. You can do managing people with chronic conditions. You can be doing solutions for a lot of different topics. You can go into construction and put wearables on people in the build phase that are actually building the buildings. But when I talked to the CEO from Omate, he's like, yeah, but it's not all that perfect. The problem is, when he did that, he still had to negotiate with a mobile operator. And in France, it took him 3 months to negotiate a contract. When they launched this in the US, it took him 2.5 months. So if you try to launch a product like this globally, and you're wasting all that time talking to the operators, it's a major headache. Next, because they can't guarantee volumes, they have to give high data pricing. So the operators see just opportunity, well, you don't have volume, so you're going to have to pay high data rates. And then finally, security is still a concern. Now, interestingly, they just launched another solution which helps solve the problem. So Omate worked with Tata to launch a children's watch. Okay, it's not an elderly care, but just imagine if it works in a children's watch, they can switch this to elderly care as well. And what I like about it is it has a Tata eSIM. Now, you've probably heard a bit about eSIMs. You know, Apple Watch uses it. Microsoft's trying to run something with eSIMs on their laptops. But what's unique about it is it's a fixed operator, but it can act as a global MVNO with access into 600 operators worldwide. Now think about that. In Singapore, we have 3 different networks, and there's a couple places with spotty coverage. If I'm using this SIM, it goes into any of the different 3 networks. What I also like is, because Tata buys this in bulk, the data costs actually go very down through the roof, or down through the floor. Also, Tata has a platform on that, which secures all the connectivity. Now, on the children's watch, this is a big deal because they launched it in Europe. And the European Commission has come down hard against children's watches because of the security risks, where hackers can track a child's location. And it got so bad that in Germany, one of the technology ministries there actually advised parents to destroy children's watches. Now, because of this, and everything's encrypted and secured all the way through, they can relaunch the watches there. So it's an interesting concept on the security side. Also, conveniently, let's face it, healthcare has issues with security. So this actually becomes an interesting solution. And what you end up getting as a consumer, instead of having to sign up for a contract, you've got a seamless customer experience. So I really like this thing, and I think this is where it's going to get very interesting when other people realize how to leverage embedded SIMs going forward. So that's the first one. The second one, we're going to go into low-power WANs, and we're going to talk about LoRa in India. And funny enough, when I originally did these slides, I didn't have Tata in the other example, so I'm not trying to push them here. They just happen to be doing two very interesting things in two very different spaces. They're launching a LoRa network nationwide in India. They're going to be covering all tier 1 to 4 cities, which is 400 million people this year, which is quite a major initiative. But what I find fascinating about this, because India is a bit behind when it comes to IoT, but they have the market demand. So they've got some massive industries, and if you're looking at a country with 1.3 billion people, there's a lot of things to do. What I like about the top 5 industries, it doesn't include smart cities, but they've got an initiative to drive the top 100 smart cities in India, and it doesn't include manufacturing, which is massive. Also on the supply side, if you look at it, they've got all the vendors, because you have all the Indian technology vendors and systems integrators, including 5 of the top 10 global SIs sit in India. So you've got the whole supply and demand side. But what makes it so challenging to do these solutions in India is the low labor costs. Why would you connect it if you can get somebody to do it for 25, 50 cents a day? And this is the big challenge we face. How do you develop an ROI in India? But I really think this can be transformative because it's going to make people think about it a different way. The first thing why I think it can be a game changer, everyone there is going to want to get involved in it. And all the big vendors, including the small Indian vendors, are getting involved because the local opportunity is massive. But what's interesting on this, if it's going to work, they're going to have to manufacture everything locally. The problem we face in Asia when you get outside of the most developed markets of Japan, Korea, and Singapore is we're developing solutions for the developed world and trying to sell them to people with a half or a quarter of the budget. What they're going to have to do in India is manufacture everything locally and then deliver it with local headcount, which means the price points are going to go down. So this developing market first is what we need to drive the emerging markets. And finally, if they can drive it there, they've got another billion-plus people to go after across the rest of Asia, if not 2 billion. So this could be a real Kickstarter. So third one, we're going to change gears completely again and talk about PropTech. And I'm excited about PropTech because I think a lot of other things are overhyped right now. A couple stats, property's largest global industry worth 217 trillion, but the industry is laggards when it comes to adopting technology. If you look at the construction industry over the last 2 decades, its productivity rate grows by about 1% a year versus 2.8 on average. So it's really far behind. But what I got interested about this is the VC funding is starting to grow quite a bit, and it's moving away from things like fintech. And I saw this stat in Singapore, is we have over 300 fintech startups in Singapore. Now, Singapore's got a population of about 5.5 million people, and we've got 300 plus fintech startups. It's probably a few too many, but only 30 in PropTech. So I started seeing this as an opportunity. But then I looked at the numbers and saw how many people are investing in PropTech now. This is from CB Insights. In 2012, there was just over 200 million in funding. 2016, it went up to 2.7 billion. Last year, it exceeded 3 billion. And you can see the number of deals are going through the roof. So I started to see a trend here, and I saw a lot of opportunity for Asia. And what I like about PropTech is it involves pretty much everything. It's existing solutions that we have today, like smart technologies for buildings, connecting up the supply chain, video surveillance, of course, to do security, predictive maintenance. But then you start looking at the emerging technologies. Smartwatches. How do we put a watch on somebody who's working on a construction site to monitor their safety? And this is a big demand in Asia because if you have someone die on your construction site, that's very bad for business. And then you look at AI, how we can connect all our buildings together. Augmented reality. So they've been doing this for years. When Melbourne put in a new metro system, they were walking around with AR where you could see where all the piping was below the ground. And now they're doing it for commercial real estate when they go out and release these things to people. So you can go and see what your office will look like. VR, Jones Lang LaSalle has this great VR product. So instead of going to the construction site to see the progress, they actually give you the headset and you can actually look at it in VR. So you don't actually have to travel there and waste the day. Drones, this is going to be an interesting one. Part of it's during the build phase. They're going to start looking at drones right now for inspecting the quality of the builds. And then I can also do it for remote site surveillance. And then blockchain. Blockchain is going to be fun because there's a couple options there. Obviously, there's the smart contract side to improve the efficiency of it. But I'm pretty sure you'll start seeing soon the tokenization of buildings. And I'm pretty sure in the next 5 to 10 years, I'll buy a share of a building just for fun. But the idea is you don't have to go out through the typical financial models anymore, go to the banks and get billions of dollars in funding. You can go to the open market and do an ICO. So I'm quite excited about this one because I think it can be transformative. But there's a couple of other things on it that I think are going to drive it. Why I like it is most of the stuff in PropTech isn't about generating new revenue streams. It's about driving efficiency, which means it isn't about rev gen, it's about problem solving. People like problem solving. It's much easier to deliver a business case to your boss and say, listen, I can save money, instead of saying, I might be able to make us money, 10% chance. So it actually makes it easier to drive it. Next, the VC firms need a fintech alternative. They threw so much money at it, they're not seeing a lot of the returns. Where's that next wave going to be? And I think this is going to be it. But what I also like is some of the world's biggest commercial real estate firms, JLL, CBRE, Capital Land, they're investing in industry-backed VC funds. Now, this is important because it's a win-win for them. If someone like JLL goes out there and invests in a company, they're going to invest in them because they're going to want to use it. So they're going to get benefits right away because they'll use that technology to deliver value back to them. But it also means that that startup now has JLL as a referenceable customer, which increases its market cap. So the value of that company goes up, and JLL owns part of it. So they can win on both sides of it. So that's why I kind of like this model going forward. So the final one, smart cities. Now, everyone loves smart cities, and we all think that we're so far advanced, and I don't think so. I got asked to rank the top 10 smart cities, and I said I couldn't because I don't think there are any. I think they're just starting right now. I think there's cities that are very good at marketing themselves as smart cities. But as far as being a truly smart city, it's got to be greenfield. And it's because smart cities are cities, and they have challenges they have to face. Number one, where's the budget? I've never found a city yet that writes blank checks. If you know of any, let me know, because I'd love to do work with them. They don't know which use cases they're going to be doing it, and they don't have the people to identify those use cases or design the solutions and deploy them, and then manage them when they're in life. So people face these challenges, and it is really, it's going to be difficult for them to move beyond. And what you see is you've probably heard about cities in Asia, so someone like Singapore and Hong Kong, you got Tokyo coming up with the Olympics. They are doing amazing things, but it's still very early days. So why am I impressed with Taipei? It's because they're one of the first ones that's moved beyond doing infrastructure-centric smart cities to actually trying to deliver citizen-centric value. So they're engaging their citizens and delivering solutions for them. Part of it's about collaboration. This image is, if you've ever been to Taipei, the big building, Taipei 101, you just saw, that road there is called Xinyi. This was an autonomous bus trial they were doing last year. And I love it because they're only going to launch them between 1 and 5 in the morning when public transport stops. But they ran it last year for a couple of months where people could then use it in place of public transport. But what Taipei did is they know that there's the major people they have to work with. They've got the government as a stakeholder, you've got the citizens, and you've got your technology vendors. And what most cities do is say, okay, inside the government, we're going to create a PMO, a project management office, that's going to manage all of these different things, these different programs that we deliver. What Taipei did is they created their PMO outside and made it independent. Now, this is important because their mandate was to go out there and engage the citizens, which they did. They ran a bunch of different programs and captured the needs of 30,000 citizens. So what are they looking for? But then they also have the government as a stakeholder. So they went to them, and they engaged in a top-down way with the top 20 government agencies to say, what solutions do you want? And we'll go out and help you source them. And then they started reaching out to technology vendors. And so far, they've engaged over 400+ technology vendors to deliver 120 proof of concepts. And this is in about a 6-month time period. What's great is it's not just the small vendors. You've got leaders like IBM and Cisco involved. You've got Sigfox out there, the local operator giving away free connections to people to go and test it. But they've got this community together where they've changed the way they do it. Instead, like most of the governments I deal with in Asia, that project management office, program management office, they're the gatekeeper and they're the blocker. They're the ones that got to try and get around to actually get some work done. What they've done is they're the ones who help you. They help you navigate the government. And vendors are now more than happy to engage with them. So it's quite fascinating how they've delivered this. But it's a game changer on this, but this is some of their other initiatives, which I wanted to cover really quick. They do a bike scheme, but everyone's got a bike scheme. This is the first time I've been in San Fran in a year and a half, and now you've got these little scooters everywhere, which are a little bit annoying, but they're just all over the place. But what they've actually going to launch this year is an electric motorized scooter scheme. And this is important for a couple reasons. So if you've ever been to Asia, there's scooters everywhere, but they're all petrol-based. These are going to be electric. Why I like this is, this last few months, the government in Taiwan has said, by 2035, we will not allow to have a gas or petrol-based scooter on the roads. They all have to be electric. So they're one of the first countries I've heard of that's actually pushing this. But the problem is, one of the country's biggest companies is Kimco, who makes these scooters. So when they made that announcement, they then went to Kimco and said, well, fine, we're going to do this, but if you make these electric scooters now, we'll give you the scheme to start launching them in Taiwan, which is great because if it works in Taiwan, they can also cover the rest of Asia, which gives them a huge market opportunity and will give them an early lead in this game. But this is a game changer because, number one, what they're doing is leveraging their infrastructure and assets. When they go to the vendors, they say, listen, we don't have money, but we have infra and assets. So you can use our sites to run your proof of concept and our infrastructure. So it's sort of a shared risk on this one. The next thing on the use cases. No city is going to come up with all the use cases. But now what they've gotten is the ICT vendors getting involved. And because people are giving away free LoRa and Sigfox connections on this right now, you're going to get that younger generation. Now think about this. Why did the Apple App Store and Google Play become so big? It wasn't because the big ICT vendors created the millions of apps that we have. It's because people like you and me could go out there and experiment for a low cost and take it to market. That's what they've actually created here, so you're getting that younger generation doing it. And finally, with the resources, they're just, like their PMO is fantastic. They do something so basic. They facilitate instead of block you. I wish more cities would do it because I think we drive a lot more initiatives going forward. So my game changers, what really sets these apart? Because if you think about it, I didn't talk about any cutting-edge technology that's going to transform anything. So what did they do? Number one, they solve a problem. We all face problems in our industries that we're looking at. These companies I talked about are finding ways to solve those problems. Number two, they don't talk about the technologies. They talk about how to provide a solution. And finally on this, they drive new collaborations. IoT isn't about one vendor winning the game. It's about working together to actually drive this. But what they really did, it's about creativity. They looked at the situation they were in, and they found a different way of doing things. And that's what we all need to do to move the industry forward. And on that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Thank you.